Hello, this is Jose Luis here at Parametric Camp, and welcome to another video in this mini series on how to use the Dall-E API. In this video, I would like to show you how to use the API with Python. And then what I did was I wrote a small program that expands on the example that comes with the documentation. And we can use this example to write a Python script that generates, for example, from a prompt, a computational designer on a YouTube live stream with a 124 square size and 2 images. I can press that, and then I am pinging right now the Dall-E Open API, the Dall-E OpenAI API, so difficult to say, right? And then I just downloaded those images. I have them on my system, and now this is this is the YouTuber on the live stream, and this is the other YouTuber. So apparently this is what I just got, which is kind of crazy. So what I would like to show you is 2 ways of doing that. I would like to show you how to use the OpenAI module, but at the same time, I would also like to show you an example how to do the same thing, but just writing a straight up HTTP post request manually without going through the OpenAI module. Okay, so without further ado, let's get hands-on. So let's start by the beginning. I'm recording this in November 7th of 2022, which means that if you're watching this from the future, this might be super obsolete at this point. But regardless, we're going to start by the best place to start, which is the documentation. If I go to the create image endpoint, you can see that we have the curl way of creating a post request, which we have seen in the previous video in this series. But if we click here, I can take a look at the Python way of creating this request. And you can see, what we can see here is that basically OpenAI is allowing us to use their own OpenAI module to generate this request in a way that is easier, faster, and you don't have to care about writing your own post request, which by the way, we're going to do at the end of this video, just for the sake of completeness and knowing how these things are done. So basically what they do is they provide you with this module that allows you to very easily and very quickly create a request with their module. All right. So we're going to follow this. And again, if you're watching this from the future, you may want to take a look at how the body of the request has changed, how the response that you get, the format has changed. It might be different from what you're seeing right now. Literally, we're recording this 3 days after this API was released. So the way that's going to work is that I have a folder on my system called Dall-E, and I created here a Python folder. So inside of this, I'm going to open a PowerShell terminal because I'm in Windows, but you could go the Ubuntu way. It doesn't matter. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a new file that I'm going to call Dall-E generate.py. And as I do that, you can see that I get the file on my Visual Studio Code. And if I go here where create completions, now images, create image. If I go to the Python, you can see that I can pretty much follow their example. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to say import OS, that is the main OS. Oh, and I forgot to say, if you haven't done this before, you probably will have to install the OpenAI module. So this one here. If you're using Anaconda environments, I suggest you start an Anaconda environment, you do your Python deployment, and then you start there. I'm just going to go the dirty way, which is installing that in my system, wherever that is. So pip install OpenAI. And by doing that, it already does because I had it before, so it's not really required installing anything or updating. But now I have the module, right? So now I can go and say import OpenAI. So now I have, So now I have the module already. And then what I'm going to do first is that I'm going to set inside of OpenAI, I'm going to set that the API key needs to be the one that I'm going to fetch from my environment. Okay. In two videos ago, I showed you how to get your OpenAI API key and how to store it as an environment variable. So make sure you check that video. Maybe a card is popping up somewhere here. So from the operating environment, I can get an environment variable that I'm going to call OpenAI API key. Again, I already defined this in my system. And just to make sure that things are working, I'm going to print this API key to the console and see if this program is already working. So I'm going to go back here and I'm going to clear the screen. I'm going to say Python and then Dall-E generate Py. And you can see that I get a printout of my API key, which I should not be sharing publicly, but don't worry, I'm going to delete this after I record these videos. So now what is next? The next thing is that I'm going to use, literally, I'm just going to copy paste this, okay? And I'm going to say OpenAI, which is the module, from the image namespace. I want to create a prompt, and then this prompt, I'm going to customize it a little bit with my own. So I'm going to say, I want to create an isometric view of a miniature city, tilt shift, bokeh, voxel, V-Ray, render, high detail. I want 2 images, and then I want them to be small. Right? And then I want to make sure that the response from this is stored somewhere. So I'm going to store that response in a variable that I'm going to print to the console. Okay? So let me now, and I could actually be using the terminal inside of Visual Studio Code, but I like the two. So you can see that this already worked. My API key was valid. I could create a request with the prompt, the number of images, the size, and then I get this guy, which is giving me 1 image, and then I get, what is the other one? And I get the other guy, which is giving me these other images, which are pretty cool. All right, so beautiful. So this is working already. I have the file on my system, so that's great. And I mean, with this, we would be ready to go. It's just that I want to explore something that we haven't done before, which is taking a look at the response format. As you have seen, the response format that we have worked with so far is just URLs, which means we get a link that we can go paste in any browser and then get that image. But what I would like to do now is I would like to actually figure out if I can take that URL directly from my script and then download it and save this image as a file in my system. There's 2 ways to go about that. One way would be, well, I can take the response, I can parse it, I can as a JSON object, and then I can take each one of the URLs and then download the image from the URL. So that is one way to go, but the one that I find better, also specifically because I want to teach you how to do this, is to using, instead of getting the response in the form of a URL, getting the response in the form of a B64 JSON. What does that mean? Let me show you something. So base64 is basically one of the most popular ways of encoding images on the web. The idea is that any image, like for example a PNG, a JPEG, a GIF, is basically zeros and ones when you store them in a file in your system. But if you want to exchange that information across computers and websites, etc., encoding it into what's called base64 is actually very efficient because you can then transfer that image in a format that is represented by text, by a bunch of characters in upper and lower case and numbers, etc., which have a way of encoding all those zeros and ones that we would use to save this file to our system. The idea is that exchanging these base64 images is a very common way to exchange images because serializing and deserializing back and forth between base64 and images is a very well-known algorithm that is very common and is accessible in every single programming language that I think of. So if I want to, in my request, if I want to say that my response format, instead of being the URL, I want it to be the B64 JSON format, I'm going to change this to one prediction only. So you're going to see something very interesting. If I make the request again, what you're going to see is that now I'm going to get this like crazy dump of like, you see all these characters, and if I can I scroll this? How can I scroll it? And if I scroll up, you can see that the request is basically when it was created, the base 64 JSON, and this crazy amount of all these characters, blah, 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 which represent the image. Okay, so they represent the image in a way that we can serialize and deserialize with the correct with the correct algorithms. So in what is it called? In Python, that looks like this. If you remember, I am getting the response in a format that looks something like this. I have created, and then I have data, and then I have an array with all the images that I've requested, 1, 2, 3, or 4. And then inside of each, I have a tag that represents URL, if it's the link, or it says B64 JSON, if it's the blob, the B64 blob. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the response and I'm going to say, I'm going to write a for loop that I'm going to say for a range that is going to go between 0 and however many elements are going to be in my data part of the response. So that would be response and then data. So for each one of those elements, I'm going to try to fetch the B64 blob and turn it into an image. Okay. So for example, I'm going to say the B64 is going to be from the response, and the data. And then from here is going to be whichever element in the I position. And then inside of that is going to be the property called b64.json. All right. So that's going to be the b64 string. So I'm going to take that. And then once I have that, what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to write that to a file. So I'm going to say with, for example, let's open a file, and that file is going to be called image underscore, and then image underscore, and what do I do? The value of I, and then PNG, and then that file is going to be a write file, and then it's going to be the file. So what I'm going to do here is that I'm going to write to this file, and this is like Python code to writing files. To this file, I'm going to write the image in B64, but deserialized from B64 into an image. So what that looks like is that, first of all, I'm going to import a module called base64, which allows me to do translations back and forth. And then from the base64 module, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the URL safe module and B64 decode. It's a function that takes a B64 string and decodes it in a safe way. So it like escapes all the characters that might be wrong, etc., etc. And then I'm going to plug in here the base64 string that I generated before. So let's see if that works out. So I'm going to save this, and then I'm going to now call the Dall-E generate again. And let's see if it's working. And I get the dump here, but then I'm also going to go here, and you can see that I have this thing called image 0, and ta-da! I have an image in my system. Yay! This is great. So I was able, with the Python script, to download the blob. You can see all of this blob here and convert it into an image on my system now, which is great. So now I can do, for example, I can call it again, right? But what happens again is that because I call it twice and I'm using the same file name here, image0.png, what has happened is that the file has basically overwritten the one that I had before. So what I would like to do is I would like to write an image. I would like to write a file name that somehow doesn't overwrite itself. So for example, I'm going to say file name is going to be equal to, for example, I'm going to format this and it's going to be image underscore. And I want, for example, the timestamp here. So the timestamp here, I'm going to import time, which is a module for generating time, etc. So time.time, literally, that's how it works. And then because this has millisecond precision, I'm going to turn this into an integer so that it doesn't have like all this nasty, and then this is going to be underscore. And then here, I'm going to plug in the number of the image in case we generate 1 or 2, okay? And then I'm going to use that as the file name. So file name. And then, for example, I'm going to request 2 images now. So I'm going to clear this. I'm going to not post here. And then I'm just going to say here, print, for example, saving file, and then file name. Okay. And then I'm going to generate this, and let's see what's going on here. I make the request, and then I just save these two files. And then you can see that I have the file with the timestamp 0 and the file with the timestamp and the value of 1, which is great. Can we try with high resolution image? So 124, 124. I'm totally going to exhaust my credits out of this YouTube, out of this stream. So I'm going to do this, and then boom. The two images, this is taking a little longer because they're heftier. And then you can see that now I have the two images, this one and this one, which are 124 by 124. Hooray! We have this Python script now that we can use to generate images and to download them to our system. So this example that I just wrote is fine, but it's not very interesting because it basically always generates the same request. And from the terminal, the only thing that I can do is just ask for this request, and I would have to go into the code to change the text and change the size, which is not very nice. Like you typically want, if you're writing a Python script, you want the possibility to, in the terminal, to write something like my prompt. I want my prompt to be a computational designer on a YouTube live stream or something like that, you know, and then say, for example, the size should be 124 and the number should be, I don't know, 2 images, something like that, right? I want something like that, but right now I don't have the possibility of doing it. Well, I took the liberty of doing this offline. So now I'm going to show you, basically what I added to the script is a way to parse some arguments and to say, well, there's going to be some defaults for the prompt, the number of items and the size. That's going to be an isometric, blah, 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 one image and a small image. And then what I'm doing is when I'm creating the request, I'm just using those arguments as the values that I generate for the body of the request. Okay. So there's defaults, but if the user wants to now customize those with their custom parameters, you can write them such as I just did before. So if I do that now, you're going to see that I'm going to get 2 images, right? Am I getting 2 images? Yes. So I get these 2 images. Look at me. Computational designer on a YouTube live stream. And the next one, oh, I don't look like this guy. Well, that is some creepy guy. That's really funny, actually. Anyway, so, but it's now more interesting because now it gives me that flexibility of trying things out. So, for example, I don't know, what can we do? A community of designers around a bonfire. For example, I don't know. Let's see what happens here. Come on, come on. Woohoo, I'm kind of curious about this now. All right. And then, those are some designers around the bonfire. And then, those were very different style-wise. Okay. All right, so that's what we got. Okay, so yes, so this file is going to be available as the sample file. So if you go to the description of this video, you will be able to download these files, okay, and use them. The last thing I would like to show before I move on to the next video is that the way we have generated the images and the way we have done the post requests have been using the OpenAI module, which OpenAI provides for us in Python, okay? But what I would like to highlight is that what this module does is nothing more or nothing less than actually hiding a HTTP post request under this module that makes it a little easier and a little faster to just write the code to get the thing running. But internally, it's just an HTTP post request, which means that technically speaking, we don't really need to use this module if we didn't want to use it for some reason, if we have trouble with like downloading and installing it, some kind of versioning problem with Python, etc., etc., we could just go the hardcore way. We could just write that HTTP post request ourselves. And the way that works, or the way that looks like, is a little bit like this. So I've written an example where you have the same thing. We're parsing the arguments, etc., etc. But what we're doing is we're getting the API key from the environment. We're just creating a variable for the URL. And then what we're creating is a bunch of objects that represent the custom headers that we need. So as you remember, if you remember from curl, we had to set up that the content was an application JSON, and we also had to set up the authorization bearer token, which I'm getting from my environments variable. Okay, remember this is basically what the API, what the OpenAI module is doing for us, just under the hood. Then I create a body with the request, which is with the prompt, with the numbers, etc., etc. And actually, I forgot to link this to the parse, to the arguments. Let me do that in 1 second. There you go. So I just linked them. And then what we do is using the requests module, which is an all mighty module to do all kinds of HTTP requests. We just post to the URL of the endpoint, which is this one here. We, as headers, we pass the headers that we just described, and the data is going to be turning this object into a string, into a JSON string that we pass as the data. We get the response goes back, and then we do the same thing as we did before, which is just saving and taking from the JSON file, taking the base64 blobs and turning them into images. So that now should look something like this. So I should be able to say Python, I should be able to say Python and then Dall-E no module, and then I could do the prompt, for example, a parametric camp community. I have no idea what's going to show up there. One image, and the size is going to be 512. Okay. And if I do that, the result that I'm going to get is pretty much the same as using OpenAI. I'm just getting the same stuff. Oh, what? This is a parametric camp community? Okay, interesting. I could see where the module I could see where the neural network is taking this from. But anyway, so we get the same response. It's just that the only difference is that we're not using the OpenAI module. We're just writing the request from scratch. Again, this might be helpful if we have compatibility issues with the OpenAI module for whatever reason. We're using older versions of Python or whatever. Or if we just want to make sure that we don't have to keep updating the module. We just want to make sure that we know exactly what we're doing. We have full control. We typically like doing things low level here in parametric camp. Okay. All right, beautiful. So I think with this is all that I wanted to show in the Python way. I think the next one is going to be, I'm going to show you how to use the API, but instead of Python, I'm going to show you how to use it in Node.js, which arguably I like much, much better. But this is a personal preference, okay? So see you on the next video, and let's take a look at Dall-E API in Node.js. Bye-bye.